The boy's small hand tugged at the expensive wool coat just as the snow began to fall harder, thick flakes swallowing the city lights, and in that quiet moment, between car horns and distant church bells, one sentence changed the course of several lives forever, because it was not spoken with innocence alone, but with the weight of hunger, fear, and hope that only a child who has lost too much can carry. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and quiet miracles that happen when we least expect them, please take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to Single Dad Diaries, because stories like this remind us that humanity still matters. Christmas Eve had never been kind to Maribel. The city looked beautiful to everyone else, windows glowing gold, shop fronts dressed in red and green, couples laughing under shared umbrellas, but to her, it was a reminder of everything she could not give her son. She walked quickly through the snow, one gloved hand gripping a thin grocery bag and the other holding Mateo's small fingers, afraid that if she slowed down, the weight of the year would finally crush her. Her coat was old, the lining torn at the sleeves, and the cold crept in like an unwanted memory. She kept her eyes down, not out of shame, but out of survival. When you are poor long enough, you learn how to disappear in plain sight. Maribel had not always lived this way. There was a time when her life had structure, laughter, and plans that stretched beyond the next rent payment. But life had shifted suddenly, as it often does for people without safety nets. Mateo's father had left before the boy could remember his face, leaving behind unpaid bills and promises that echoed hollow in the empty apartment. Then came the layoffs, the medical debt from a winter illness, and finally the eviction notice taped to her door like a public accusation. She worked 2 jobs after that, cleaning offices at dawn and assisting at a small logistics firm during the day, but even that was barely enough. The logistics job was the one that mattered most, not because it paid well, but because it gave her the illusion of stability. The boss, Mr. Alden, was known in the building as efficient, distant, and intimidating. He rarely smiled, rarely spoke beyond what was necessary, and never learned the names of people who did not sit in offices with glass walls. That night, Maribel had stayed late again, finishing year-end files while Mateo slept on a chair in the break room, his head resting on her scarf. She hated bringing him to work, hated the looks of quiet judgment and the whispered sympathy, but she had no choice. Childcare was a luxury she could not afford, especially not now, not when tomorrow they would no longer be living in the apartment Mateo thought was home. They were moving, though she had not yet explained what that meant. Moving, to Mateo, sounded exciting, like new adventures. To Maribel, it meant a shelter on the other side of the city and a waiting list that stretched into uncertainty. When they finally left the building, the sky was already dark, the air sharp with cold. Maribel's mind raced through practical worries, bus schedules, shelter rules, how to keep Mateo warm through the night, but she did not notice that Mateo had slowed down, his gaze fixed on the tall figure standing near the entrance. Mr. Alden had just stepped outside, his phone pressed to his ear, his expression tight with frustration. He was talking about delayed shipments and holiday deadlines, about problems that, to him, felt enormous and urgent. Mateo let go of his mother's hand. Children have a way of stepping into moments adults avoid. Mateo walked up to the men without fear, without understanding the invisible lines drawn by class and power. He looked up, his breath fogging the air, and tugged gently at the coat. Mr. Alden paused mid-sentence, irritation flickering across his face, ready to dismiss the interruption, until he saw the boy's eyes. They were serious, tired, and hopeful all at once. Mateo spoke softly, not realizing how loudly his words would echo in a stranger's heart. He explained that Santa might not know where to find them this year, that they had moved, and that maybe, since the men looked important, he could help pass along the message. Maribel turned just in time to see it, the color drain from her boss's face, the way his phone slipped from his hand. She rushed forward, apologizing, mortified, her voice trembling as she tried to pull Mateo back. She expected anger, maybe even consequences she could not afford. Instead, there was silence. The snow fell heavier, wrapping the moment in a strange stillness. Mr. Alden had not heard a child speak of Santa in decades. His own son was grown now, distant in ways that hurt more than he admitted. The boy's words struck something buried deep inside him, something he had carefully ignored for years. He looked at Maribel then, not as an employee, not as a line on a payroll, but as a mother standing at the edge of something frightening and unknown. He noticed the worn coat, the thin gloves, the way her shoulders sagged under invisible burdens. He asked questions, slowly, awkwardly, as if unsure how to step into a life so different from his own. Maribel answered honestly, because there was no point in pretending anymore. She spoke of the move, of the shelter, of doing her best. She spoke without asking for help, because pride had long ago taught her not to expect it. What happened next did not feel like a miracle at first. There were no sudden embraces, no dramatic gestures. There was simply a man making a decision he had postponed for too long, to see the people around him. Mr. Alden offered them a ride, insisting despite Maribel's hesitation. The car was warm, quiet, filled with the faint scent of pine from a small air freshener. Mateo pressed his face to the window, marveling at the lights, humming a tune he had learned at school. Instead of driving toward the shelter, Mr. Alden turned onto a different street. He explained, carefully, that he owned a small apartment above one of the company's unused offices, something he had kept vacant for years out of convenience. It was modest, he said, but warm. He offered it not as charity, but as something practical, temporary, something that made sense. Maribel listened, stunned, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. Accepting help had always felt dangerous, like stepping onto ice that might crack. But when she looked at Mateo, his cheeks pink from warmth instead of cold, she nodded. The apartment was small but clean, with a kitchen that smelled faintly of dust and a living room that held only a couch and a lamp. To Maribel, it felt like a palace. Mateo ran from room to room, laughing, his joy filling the space. Mr. Alden stood awkwardly by the door, unsure of his place in the moment. Before leaving, he placed a small envelope on the table, explaining it was an advance on holiday pay, nothing more. Maribel wanted to refuse, to insist she could manage, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she whispered a thank you that carried more emotion than she could express. That night, after Mateo fell asleep on the couch, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, Maribel sat alone in the dim light. She cried silently, not from sadness, but from relief so overwhelming it hurt. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a future that did not feel like a constant emergency. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the city in quiet grace. The days that followed were not magically easy. Maribel still worked long hours, still worried about money, still felt the ache of exhaustion in her bones. But something had shifted. Mr. Alden began greeting her by name. He asked about Mateo, about school, about how they were settling in. Small changes followed, flexible hours, a modest raise, opportunities Maribel had never been offered before. She worked harder than ever, not out of fear, but out of gratitude and a renewed sense of dignity. Mateo adjusted quickly, children always do. He talked about Santa with certainty now, convinced that his message had been delivered. He made friends at school, laughed more, slept better. The apartment slowly filled with signs of life, drawings taped to the fridge, a second-hand rug, the smell of home-cooked meals. Maribel found herself smiling more often, catching herself in moments of quiet happiness she once thought impossible. Mr. Alden, too, changed in ways he did not anticipate. He found himself staying later at the office, not to work, but to listen. He began to see the stories behind the faces that passed him every day. He reconnected with his own son, awkwardly at first, bridging years of emotional distance with tentative conversations and shared meals. The boy's simple request on Christmas night had reopened a door he thought was permanently closed. Life did not become perfect. There were setbacks, arguments, moments of doubt. But there was also growth, resilience, and a sense of community that had been missing before. Maribel eventually moved into a place of her own, modest but secure. Mateo grew taller, more confident, carrying with him the quiet belief that kindness could come from unexpected places. Years later, on another snowy Christmas Eve, Maribel stood by a window, watching Mateo, now older, wiser, help a younger child pick up dropped gloves on the sidewalk. She felt a familiar warmth in her chest, a reminder of how far they had come. Some moments define us not because of their size, but because of their timing. A single sentence, spoken without fear, had altered the direction of their lives. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the power of compassion and the unseen battles people fight every day, please take a moment now to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to Single Dad Diaries. Your engagement helps keep stories like this alive. Before you go, we have one special request. Please leave a comment sharing what kindness means to you, or a moment when a small act changed your life. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read tonight. Because sometimes, the greatest gifts are not wrapped in paper or tied with bows. Sometimes, they come quietly, on cold nights, spoken by children who still believe the world can be better, and remind us that it can.